All right, so VMware ESXi server is running. What's next? Let's create a VM. Okay, so we're logged into the VMware ESXi server. Your main focus in this portal is going to be inside the virtual machines tab on the left. So here's going to be a list of all your virtual machines that you'll be running. So before we continue, let's go to storage first, because this system has a 500 gigabyte boot drive, which I want to keep just for the boot. I know it's overkill, but I like to keep the boot drive separate from everything else. I have another 1 terabyte SSD in the system that I want to use for everything else, VMs, ISOs, stuff like that. So if I go to the devices tab, I can see my 2 drives, local NVMe disk, and there's an SATA disk as well. So I will click on this, and because this had previous data on it, it's got partitions on it. So we need to first wipe this thing clean slate. So I want to go to actions and then clear partitions table. And then it's going to ask us, are you sure you want to delete everything that's on here? All the partitions, everything. Yeah, this destructive, you can't recover anything, right? So we'll press yes. It's going to go and wipe the whole drive. Okay, looks like that did the trick. We got no more partitions on this. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on new data store. And for this, I will call that VM store. And we want to use the full disk. We want to use the latest version of VMFS. And yep, that looks good. Use full disk, yep. And we're going to finish. Entire contents are about to be erased. Okay, so now it's going to go through the actual format. Before we were deleting the partitions, now it's going to format it. Okay. Here we can see VMFS, 1 partition, ready to be used. Okay, and so we go back. Now, if we go to data stores, here we go. We have data store 1, which is our boot drive, and we have VM store, which is our 1 terabyte SSD in here. That looks good. Now, when I go in here, I want to actually create a folder inside this volume. So I want to go to data store browser and make sure that VM store is selected. And I want to create a directory, and we'll call this ISO. All right. And now what I want to do is upload the ISO of whatever operating system I want to install. In my case, I have a Windows Server 2022 ISO, which I will be uploading. So let's click the upload button, select it, and upload it. So this may take some time. And the reason we're doing it this way, I mean, we could, technically we could build the virtual machine and have a USB stick, plug it into our computer or my computer, and then pass the USB stick through to the virtual machine and then boot off of there. But since this is running on a server in my network, that's going to take quite a while to transfer all that data across the network, and then it's just going to be very slow. So what we're doing is we're just creating a data store on the server, and then we have direct access from one disk to the other to the ISO, and it's much faster to install the operating system. So we're just going to have to wait. Down here we can see how far along we are. 20%. So we'll just have to wait until this is finished. Okay, the upload finally completed. So now we can see we have the ISO inside the ISO folder that we just created. All right, so that's good to go now. So we'll close that. Then you may want to check, depending on what your network setup is and what your requirements are. You may want to check your networking setup, your port groups, your virtual switches. Depending on your physical NICs, you can set up different different groups, and there's a whole lot of things, a whole lot of setup that you can do to separate traffic. And for example, we can separate the management network from the VM network, so they're on a completely separate subnet and they can't talk to each other, which that's the ideal way to set it up. In our case, we're just going to leave it as default. So we're going to go back to virtual machines, and then we'll click on the create/register VM button, and we want to create a new virtual machine. We'll call this WinServe 2022. ESXi 8 virtual machine, guest OS family, select guest OS. This will be a Windows OS version. This will be Microsoft Server 2022, 64-bit. We'll leave this option unchecked and we'll continue. We'll want to create it inside the VM store. And when we create this virtual machine, it'll actually create a folder according to the name, and then store all the virtual hard disk and all the VM files that it needs to run inside that folder. So we'll click next. Now we get to the hardware, virtual hardware window. So we can decide how many CPUs do we want, how many cores. So servers, actual big servers, they come in many flavors. There could be one CPU, 2 actual sockets, right? So there's 2 actual CPUs on the motherboard, and according to that, you specify how many CPUs you want. In my case, my simple workstation tower or my motherboard only has 1 socket, but we're going to be looking at the core count of the CPU, of the virtual CPU that you want to have running on this machine. Keep in mind, this will take from the total amount of gigahertz available to the physical processor, and it'll try to balance and prioritize threads and tasks accordingly. A good standard is to go with 4 cores. Some even recommend 2 if it's a very light load, if it's not doing very much, if it's an SMTP server, simple things like that. You can do 2 cores, sometimes even 1. I wouldn't recommend having 1 CPU core, especially for Windows Server, because that's going to be quite slow. So we'll go with 4 cores for now. And how much memory do we want? We'll have to keep in mind also that this will take from the total available memory from the system, and all the virtual machines will be sharing all that total memory. So I will give this machine 8 gigabytes of memory. 8 gigabytes, again, that's what I think should be the minimum. Hard disk, so this is a recommended space for a virtual hard disk when you select the operating system. So we're going to leave that there. You have options of thin provisioning and thick provisioning. So thin provision will only take as much space as it is actually using, and then grow as space is required. Whereas thick provisioned it's reserved, that 90 gigabytes is reserved on the SSD. So we'll leave this as thick provisioned for now. We'll leave that. VM network. Yeah, network adapter should be on the VM network. The adapter type, it's always recommended to switch it to VMXNet 3. That's the virtual adapter that performs best. We'll switch it to that. We don't need a CD drive. Actually, we do, yes. We need to run the ISO file on this machine. So we'll need to select data store ISO, go to our ISO folder, select Windows Server 2022, and now that's loaded, and they're both checked to connect on startup. Connect at power, CD, DVD, okay, yeah, that's good. Video card, default settings, yeah, that looks good to me. We'll leave it like that, and click next. Quick glance over the settings. Okay, that looks good to me. And we'll click finish. So now it's created our virtual machine. Click on it, so it'll show us some information. VMware Tools is not installed in this virtual machine. Yeah, this is recommended on every virtual machine that you have. It simplifies the controls and feature sets that you can do through ESXi through to the VM. So let's fire this thing up. Okay, and we want to press any button to boot. Okay, here's our Windows install screen. We'll just go through the setup, get Windows Server 2022 installed. We would like to go with standard desktop experience. The difference between standard and desktop experience is desktop experience gives you the GUI. So when we're using Windows 11, where we are interacting with windows and buttons and that. Standard is just command line based. There's no graphical user interface. In our case, we want to go with desktop experience. Click next. We'll hit accept. We want to do a custom install, and here you can see the virtual hard drive, 90 gigabytes. We want to use all of that, and we'll just let it do its thing. All right, now we are at the login screen for Windows Server 2022. We just need to create a password. Oh boy. Hey, it worked. All right. Now we're at the lock screen. Now we need to press Ctrl Alt Delete to unlock the screen. So we want to go to Guest OS, Send Keys, and Ctrl Alt Delete. And then we enter our password. Sure. Okay. There you go. Server Manager is starting up. And that's it. We have successfully installed Windows Server 2022. One very useful tip that I would like to also give you, if you have virtual machines running in the background that always need to be up, like a web server or like a Unify server or something like that, then we'll want to enable a feature called Auto Start. So in case of a power outage or in case of a reboot of your ESXi server, once your ESXi server comes back up, it will automatically start a virtual machine for you as well. So you don't have to log in there first and then start the virtual machine. How you do that is, let's get out of here. We'll want to go to Host, Manage, Auto Start on the left here. And then we can see our virtual machines here. So we'll click on this one. We'll say Enable. And then we can configure different things. Start delay, stop action, different options there. Wait for heartbeat. But essentially this is the option where you do that. So that's a super handy feature. Other than that, our virtual machine is up and running. One last thing that we maybe want to do is install VMware Tools. So let's do that. Make sure that that works. The mouse is kind of laggy. Maybe you can't tell from the video, but the mouse is kind of laggy, which is very often the case until you install VMware Tools, which just installs drivers that make everything much smoother and more compatible. And then you can send commands to the virtual machine from the VMware server. Okay, so that requires a system start. It shrunk my window by quite a bit. There we go. That's better. Finish. Yeah, yes, let's restart it. And while this thing is booting up, on the graph down here, we can see the consumed CPU and host memory. So you can monitor your performance of your virtual machine. And there you go, it's back up now. Send keys, Control Alt Delete. And we're in. If you ever need to modify some your virtual machine settings, it's also very easy to do. You just come up here, click Edit. Certain things like CPU, memory, you have to do while the machine is off. Makes sense. But yeah, you can, here's the same settings that we see that as we had when we set up the machine. And that's how you build a virtual machine in VMware ESXi 8. Thanks for watching, hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.